Hey everyone, I hope you're all doing well today. Make sure you check out my Patreon if you want to support my channel or if you want early access to my stories. And make sure that you check out my podcast too in the description below. I have a quick message before the stories start, so if you'd like to listen to the stories and go straight to them, there's a timestamp in the description below. So for today I'd like to share this. When things go wrong, it can be really easy to lose sight of what you're doing and your motivation. During these times, it's really important that you take control of your mind because it's very, very easy for your mind to turn against you and make things worse. And like I've said before, oftentimes things aren't as bad as they seem. If you can't control your mind, then it's going to be a lot harder to control other things. So if you can, take time to calm yourself down and control your thoughts and start to think positive and talk to yourself positively in your head. And again, if times are going rough, remember that sometimes you just have to ride out the bad patches and just keep going. And it may be difficult and you might not be able to see the objective in your current situation or where you'd like to go, but trust me, it's there. You just need to stay positive and keep at it. And don't push yourself too hard. It's okay to have days off and just to rest and do the things you enjoy. I think when it comes to people's mental health, often they go too hard at trying to get better sometimes, and they end up feeling down if they don't get the results they want, i.e. a bad day. But don't worry, it's completely normal and a part of it. And again, remember, if you're really struggling or stressed out, for example with anxiety, it's important to think of, are there any other things that are making me cause this that might not be normal? Like if you're constantly very anxious going out meeting people and going outside generally, then you might have social anxiety or something similar. And with the right help, you can completely turn it around. Sometimes it's just important to know what's out there and what could be wrong to get the help first. Because I know some people too might be scared of any kind of description of something they might potentially have or automatically assume they can't possibly have it. But remember, that's the wrong mindset. And if something is wrong, there's definitely ways to get better with it. So I hope that can make a difference, and I hope everyone enjoys the stories. I'll speak to you all soon. So, I worked as a camp counselor during my college years. Now, several years before, stories of things like skinwalkers become culturally commonplace. Well, certainly before I'd heard of them. Now, one year, we had a night hike activity with story stations. My station had me by myself on a cliff that overlooks a river, and about halfway through the hike, I was generally the furthest from the other staff at any given time. But because I was in charge of the nature programs, I knew the woods like the back of my hand. I wasn't frightened in the least. Unless there was a recent rain, I could usually get to and from my station without a light. There was another activity where the kids would lead me blindfolded somewhere and I would lead them back, still blindfolded. I know those woods and those trails. The program staff / storytellers would get a notice to turn off our radios before the first group started the trail. After that, it was dead silent in the dark woods until the first group got there. Since I was far enough, I would usually be 15 to 20 minutes before the first group come in. So one night I'm up there, waiting, at this steep cliff, and I hear about 2 feet behind me, some kind of kid's voice which sounds like it's about maybe 10 feet away now saying my name, clear as day. Now it might not seem very strange to hear a kid saying your name at a camp, but think you're alone. And it's important here that we use nicknames for each other for safety reasons, and not a single child would actually know my first name. The staff did, but they were all at least 50 or 60 yards away, and this was very much a child's voice. It was also coming from what should have been mid-air. It scared me so bad that I had to leave my station and get closer to the next one so I could at least talk to her in the darkness. Over the course of the summer, almost all of the program staff had similar experiences during the night hikes, until finally we scrapped the activity because nobody wanted to be there alone without radios again. Now, let me preface this by explaining that I'm not claiming this was any particular phenomenon. I'm telling you exactly what happened as it happened. No exaggeration or lying of any kind onto what happened. Now, 20 years ago, my older brother and I, who was 19 and 15 at the time respectively, were working on a landscaping job in northern Arizona. So we had gotten off work at the site around 7 PM, hopped into the truck and started the 45-minute commute home. On my way back, there is a dirt road that leads about 20 miles into the desert. It's there mainly to take dirt bikes out or go four-wheeling, etc. But we would use it as it's a good spot to stop and just smoke. So we drive for a couple of miles and park in between these two hills that hide the truck and us pretty well. We've done this about 30 times up to that point, but never again. Now we stop and I commence a ritual. He was talking about something, but I wasn't really listening until I heard his voice change saying, "Did you hear that?" We both listen and hear a high-pitched, tiny sound for a split second, then suddenly silence. The desert is actually pretty loud at night. I remembered realizing that the sound is gone suddenly. As we sat there for maybe 5 seconds, my brother gasps and starts the truck and floors it. We go absolutely flying out of there, and I'm asking what happened, but he doesn't say anything. We hit the street, and the lights of a passing car show his face. He's pale and completely wide-eyed and mouth open. I got scared seeing him like this and just wondered what had happened. He finally stopped at a McDonald's parking lot and then we got into town. He starts crying. I pat him on the shoulder and say, "Are you okay?" Then he says, "Remember what, man? We're in the desert for like 5 minutes before you went flying out like a crazy person." He then starts sobbing. He said, "It had me. And he couldn't do anything. He said it took me." At this point I started putting some things together. It was quiet out, no cars. Looked at one of those billboard clocks and saw it was 11:11 PM. My brother told me something had grabbed me through my passenger side window. He had went for his pistol when he suddenly realized he was frozen and couldn't move. And that he knew if he didn't move and get us out of there that we would die right then. He said he felt it in his heart to be true. He then said that he saw this thing which is very tall, thin with huge black eyes. He doesn't remember much else about it, just tall and thin with black eyes that are massive. He sat frozen in absolute terror for hours while the thing disappeared with me into the desert. Then apparently I suddenly appeared in the truck and he gunned it out of there. Over the years I've spoken to him about it twice and he hates the fact I mention it. Now I'm not a forest or park ranger, but I hunt. Now when I say hunt, I don't mean sit down in some tree stand. I mean I'm the guy going out hunting by walking over the entire park with enough on my back to let me sleep at night sort of comfortably, but little enough that I'm not dragging my 150 pounds of yummy out of the woods. Alright, so I'm hunting a fairly large forest somewhere in the northeast corridor of the US. It's not uncommon to run into other people at the edges of the woods. It's fairly uncommon to run into people in the middle of the woods, however, even if it's during the hunting season, unless that is that you're on the trails, which I wasn't. It's decently common to run into ruins of buildings from the 1800s. I happened to be hunting a new valley I was pretty sure had a crossing on it to set the view. I'm basically sitting at the top of a very steep shell, which is actually on the side looking down into a valley with a creek running through it. Approaching this plateau, there's a knife edge that runs up and down the ridge, so it's difficult to get here unless you're extremely determined, drunk or foolish without actually walking up and down the edge. Getting up here creates quite a lot of noise too from stone sliding on stones, which means that I need to sit up here for an hour to let things settle back down after I made my ascent. It's really difficult, and I left my day pack at the bottom under a pine tree and only had a rifle, binoculars, water and an energy bar. I'm up here for about 3 hours, glassing this little area of a stream, looking for something to cross it, and see nothing but squirrels and the birds, and I finally decide to start glassing the opposite hill out of sheer boredom. I am 90% sure I chose a poor spot and wasted an afternoon looking at nothing. Such is hunting. It's got really interesting days, and it's got really boring days, and this is why it's called hunting and not shooting. Now when I'm screwing around with the binoculars focus, I catch something which almost looks like a person, if they were wearing dark clothes and approximately 4 feet tall. Now 99% of the time, day hikers just pass by without realizing I'm here even with the blaze orange requirements, or this person must have just pretended they didn't see me, but you'd be amazed how many times somebody has almost walked straight through my strand. Anyway, this person wasn't moving, which makes me start to think that I'm wrong. I'm just standing there, behind the cover of some low scrub brush and tree branches, and I would have missed it if it wasn't for the colour. I zoom out a bit and realise I'm not looking at a person, but it's actually a collapsed cabin. And I was looking at where the door would be, except it really looks like a person, and cabins aren't blue. I move the zoom back onto the door and I play with the focus for about 5 minutes, and I can't get the person to come back. In fact, the cabin door now has some light from the setting sun visible through the holes in the walls and roof. Whatever 4 foot tall thing I was looking at's moved. Teenagers, right? I thought to myself. Then I realised something else. I can still hear birds and squirrels and all the other things in the woods that would typically go quiet when they notice something, which means they haven't realised I'm here, but also that means that they didn't notice whatever was in the cabin door a short while ago. Now I'm doing my very best to stay as quiet as I can. I would have expected everything in the woods to have gone for cover with a teenager crashing through the brush, but the noise almost made the situation worse. There was stuff moving in the brush now. The problem was the stuff was moving around in the brush. I started to think that maybe it's a trick of the light, since the sun is setting, and it was getting to the part of the day when the tree stumps look like this. I knew I would have to move soon and figured I might as well pack it up, since I still had to get down off that shell and back to the pine tree where I had planned to throw a tarp and sleep. At this time, I realised it wasn't dark per se, but it was overcast now. Again, the creepy experience isn't that there's something obviously wrong, it's that everything is so completely normal from what I expected where I was alone. About this time, a fog rolled into the valley, with the combination of overcast weather conditions, sunset, and a ground fog coming up in the wet. There was low valley which had signalled it was time to leave. I checked my safety, put the caps on my glass and reached up to take down my orange flag. The moment I grabbed the flag, dread come over me. That's the only way I can describe it. The woods went from animals going home to sleep to full on, you're in a bad situation here. The movement had attracted what I can only describe as 1,000 invisible eyes, which all turned in unison to notice me. Ever wonder what a deer in headlights feels like? This is it. Then I hear children. I heard children laughing. Not teenagers, not adults, not women, but full-on 5-year-olds laughing like they caught a firefly. I had hiked in 5 miles from the previous day through the woods and put down 2 more today. When I woke up to get to this spot, I distinctly heard children laughing during what I can only describe as the creepiest moment of my life, knowing I'm completely unoccupied having standed there for at least 4 hours or so. I'm pretty sure my feet only touched the shell 3 times getting down from the knife edge, and so it made a ton of noise in doing so. At this point I really don't care. I grabbed my pack and flashlight and absolutely full on rocked it to the next hilltop. I killed my light halfway up the hill, then went to the top of the hill where I threw down the tarp and unrolled my foam, and there I sat all night watching the hill I come from. Now deep in the backwoods, in the backcountry of Montana, my mum was basically hiking up a mountain to get a crystal dig site. She got separated from her group near the end of the trail and was the first to reach the top of the mountain. As she stood on the trail, she saw what she described as a 4-foot by 6-foot black piece of silk whipping through the trees, hovering about 8 feet from the ground. She was startled but not afraid, and she sensed that the thing was aware of her presence and was moving as quickly as it could away from her. She said it was like an Ewok moving from Star Wars. This occurred in 2017, and ever since my mum has posted countless places online asking has anybody else ever seen this, and nobody else seems to have. So I'm a park warden. I basically spend most of my shifts alone, working 5:30 to 2:30 AM in the Canadian wilderness. We have around 300 or so campsites and a handful of beaches and the infrastructure that goes with them, like showers, etc. It just happens that my park is closed for the winter, which are standard in Canada. There can be feet upon feet of snow and blistering cold, so there's no staff in the park from mid-October to early April. Years ago, a man unfortunately decided to end it all by the river on one of the beaches in November, and nobody actually found him until spring melt. This beach is at the farthest northern point of the park and is pretty isolated, but as it has a beach, it requires at least one patrol an evening. I was just down in the showers at that Pacific beach around 7 PM on a very overcast day, so no sun to create shadows. I was checking the supplies in the first aid kit and signing off on fire extinguishers. The weather was blah, so there's no campers out or patrols anywhere near the beach, and the parking lot was empty except for my cruiser. All of a sudden, a feeling of intense panic washed over me and I booked it to the cruiser. I get in and slam the door, and a few breaths in and wait for the feeling to pass. After a minute or two, I get back to business, but this time I'm doing so in my locked car. Now by this time, I start filling out blinders and work logs, and suddenly, a huge dark shape moves across my driver's side window, and I scream and jump back. My immediate thought was that somebody had been lurking and was about to try and open the door. Sure enough, I open the door and it's empty, not a soul around. You can bet to God that I left any and all future maintenance tasks in that neck of the park to be done by the day shift. I floored it out of there. Now maybe it's not the scariest or most shocking story that I've shared, but it really rattled me to the core, and I know I saw something that day, and it still shakes me even now. Now this story really happened over 20 years ago, back when I was 16. During this time, I lived with my mum and stepdad in a remote area 70 miles west of Las Vegas, Nevada. I had gone out to visit my friends, being allowed to drive over on my own for the first time ever. I had a lovely time watching a movie and getting food together until it was time for me to head home. The curfew I was given was 10 PM, but if I was running late for any reason whatsoever, then I had to phone and call my parents, but I would need to find a payphone to do so. That night, wrapped around me and my 71 Chevy pickup, as there was no street lights or any houses for most of the way home. As I pulled up to the first of two stop signs, I could see an older sedan stopped with its hazards on. I pulled up behind it and waited as a man in his 30s to 40s started walking towards me from the driver's side. Even at this point, I didn't have any alarm bells going off. Being in the middle of the Mojave Desert, providing some assistance or anything to stranded people was pretty common. Now people rapidly go into severe problems by not having enough water when a vehicle breaks down and not realizing that it's a desert and people die wandering deliriously away from the highway for help. Anyhow, I rolled down my window, and as he come abreast of my door, I could smell the liquor on him. I could then see another man in the passenger seat, as this was before anybody I knew had cell phones, and the nearest payphone was a good 10 minutes drive ahead, and I didn't have a way to call the cops on a drunk driver immediately. The man explained that his car stalled and said, can I help him out? I said to him, is it a stick shift? Which it was, so I said, was he familiar with push starting? He said yes. So I agreed to, gently as I could, push the car with my truck while the engine tries to tick over. For anyone that isn't familiar, this is a way to start a manual car that's having battery or starter issues. I knew my truck would be fine, and I didn't feel like it would be wise to get out and try and push the car physically. Pushing the car worked without a hitch, but here's where things started going south. They get out and thank me. They then invite me to hang out and have some fun with them, but I decline. They pull off to the side of the road and I continue on my way. Only then they begin following. So here I am. It's 09:50. I'm running late because I stopped to help them. Admittedly, I hadn't given myself much leeway from leaving my friends to begin with. Then these drunk, creepy older guys started following me on a road without any man-made lights except for car headlights, and I'm at least 10 minutes from a payphone. I started to think to myself, maybe I'm being paranoid, so I turned down a road that I know gave me a couple turn-offs to either head back to town or loop around to the gas station with a payphone. The car follows behind me. I'm thinking, God, so I take another turn that only leads to a couple of houses at the end of the road, and they turn behind me. I take another turn to loop back around and head to the station, and they follow again, so at least I know they are following me and not just heading home. At this point, my heart's pounding. I decide to try and lose them. I pull the car to the side of the road, and I see them pull up behind me. I wait as the driver gets out of the car and begins walking towards me. His companion also gets out and starts walking towards me. I wait until they almost get to my tailgate and floor it. My wheels dig into the rock and a puff dirt comes up behind me, which is basically a cloud. With the lead way, I'm heading towards a gas station. The gas station is deserted, but the payphone is showering the lights from the gas pumps. I call home and explain what had happened and why I was running late. My stepdad then said speak to the worker there and try and get directions back. And luckily they gave me some directions and I made it home okay that night. Now, I'm not really a park ranger, but an environmental educator at a nature preserve, so I spend a lot of time outdoors, and it's something I've done often in isolated areas. There's one particular area at the park that I try not to take the group of kids anymore. Now, once in a while we have to go through that trail since it's a shortcut to the kayak launch, and when it's about 95 degrees out, you're ready for anything to make your trip shorter. When I started there, one of the first things that I did was familiarize myself with all the areas of preserve. So I spent a lot of time hiking through all of the trails, even the rarely used ones, since I have to know my way around to navigate groups or go rescue someone if they get lost, which happens. Now, one part of the preserve is an old homestead site of a now abandoned pineapple plantation. It was settled in the 1890s. We don't know much about the family beyond the name and the approximate year they settled there, and the approximate year the homestead was abandoned. Now, this is in southern Florida, and there are thousands of similarly abandoned homestead sites. The early settlers of that area had to be tough as nails. This was pre-railroad area, and the nearest town was about 5 miles through what would have been wilderness at the time with no real roads. So these guys are on their own in a land absolutely bursting with mosquitoes, panthers, bears, and bad water. Water table is high and fresh water can easily be contaminated by salt water nearby. In other words, the early homesteaders were pretty tough because that's the only way they'd survive. There is a narrow trail though that was once a homestead site. Now on one of my first days, I decided to trek through there. I got about half a mile in when I start to get weird vibes. Now I've always been relatively sensitive to my surroundings and kind of have a good touch if something's off really. I guess it's something you just develop in time of being out in the woods and whatnot, or isolated areas, but if something's not right, it probably means that your instincts are picking up on something you should pay attention to. Usually this means your brain is picking up on minute movements on the ground that indicate an unfriendly snake may be nearby or another animal that you don't want to confront. While the panthers are nearly gone, we've got aggressive wild boars and bobcats that freely roam. So I stop dead in my tracks and let my mind go quiet, looking around carefully for any warning signs, and there aren't any. And I didn't see any recent tracks, but the bad vibe feeling was still there, and I shrugged it off and kept going. The trail was beginning to get narrower, and the bad vibes kept growing in my gut. I felt I was being watched and followed. Now, this is an isolated area, so the possibility that a person was following me is remote, but possible. I stopped every few meters, but there was no sounds. Actually, none at all, not even birds. I start to sweat and my heart starts to race. One thought that kept echoing in my mind: you are not welcome here. Turn around and go. Well, I thought, just getting jittery from my nerves. I thought I might come to a bend and the trail could stop. Now this is almost what happened when I felt this. My feet would go no further. In my mind, the phrase got louder and louder that I'm not welcome here. I then hear a crash behind me, but when I turn to investigate, there's no one there. No animal, human, nothing. The vegetation was sparse enough that I would have been able to see something, so I turned around and left. I put it down to nerves or me being a wimp or something and sort of forgot about it. About a month later, I'm taking a campground through the kayak launch where our kayaks are. I decided to take the kids through the narrow trail to save us about 10 minutes. We get to the same bend of trail and the kids have gone silent. These are 9-year-olds in summer camp. They are not silent, they're never silent. I look behind me to one kid who looks as though he's scared, terrified. I don't like it here. Why not? He looked at me and said, we shouldn't be here. Now I couldn't turn around at this point, so we hustled to the kayak launch and all was well, but we're a little on edge. I took another group through the trail a week later, and again, the kids are silent at that bend in the trail. For that whole summer, whoever I took to the shortcut would go silent and get the bad vibes. Now, I try not to go down that stretch of trail anymore if I can help it. Obviously, this is nothing more than a gut feeling, but it's not a lonely one. It's shared by many others who have no idea about things here. Now, I don't know if it's the spirit of whatever homestead was there, but it's hard to describe and there's definitely something wrong there. I really can't explain this. I only worked as a park ranger for 1 year, but I had an experience I'd like to share. I was on patrol one day, just doing my usual business, not too far away from the ranger station. I'd only been doing the job for about 3 months, so really not too long, and everything was completely normal. Now, usually weird things can happen to me, but never really anything that I couldn't explain. So I felt fairly confident during this time. I had a couple of weird things to deal with, like people that thought they were missing and stuff, but it was basically just hikers that had got lost and I had no issue helping them back. One of the big dangers while you're in a park like this one, a national park is you can get dehydrated very easily and not really realise it. So it's important that you always have water, and I always had water with me. The only annoying thing that ever really happened was I managed to burst my camel pack and it leaked all down my back. At the time I was terrified because I thought I was bleeding, but this was a different story and not what happened on one particular day. So I'm on my patrol like normal, and I feel fairly confident. I haven't done the job for too long, but I seem to be picking up lots of different things, and all of the other rangers at work here are very helpful and friendly. Now I have to patrol a certain area, and I get to the first checkpoint. When I get to the checkpoint, I can hear music playing. It sounds very faint, but I check my phone quickly, to which makes me realise that there's nothing playing from my phone. I quickly feel around in my other pockets thinking maybe I've got someone else's phone by mistake, but there's nothing. I then throw the pack on the ground and I realise it's not coming from me, so that raises the next question: where is it coming from? I remain still for a moment and I can hear an old music box being played. Now it's really weird. It sounds relatively powerful but kind of far away, but I really can't tell the direction. This is really bizarre and like nothing I've ever experienced before. I managed to convince myself that maybe somebody had left one out here and I should try and find it. I managed to eventually coordinate roughly where the sound should be coming from, and it's in the direction I need to go regardless, so I head off. While I'm walking, I realise that something just feels different now. Not like I'm in danger, but almost like I am out of my body, if that makes sense, like I've gone into autopilot. I walk for a good 5 minutes and realise that the sound hasn't stopped. It's really strange. I look up and I can see some kind of strange white light just coming through the tree line up where I think the sound is coming from. It's weird because it kind of looks like sunlight but too bright and white to be that, and it's actually hurting my eyes. Now it's strange because this seems to move off, completely unnatural to sunlight or other things that should be here, and I knew it was real because it was so bright that it kind of left the trail in my vision as like a green colour. You know, if you ever catch a reflection or laser in your eye, it kind of burns for a few seconds, just like that. So I was certain something was there. So I continue after whatever this was. Now the sound continues and continues, and I don't ever seem to get closer to it. I literally took off half my clothes at one point just to check there wasn't anything on me, because that would be absolutely hilarious if it was on me, but there wasn't anything. And the sound seems to vanish and all is normal. So I ended up finishing my shift for the rest of the day and heading into the cabins where I was actually sleeping. Now I managed to forget about what I heard that day. However, halfway through the night, I hear that same sound again. Convinced I was dreaming, I rub my eyes, and then the adrenaline hits me and wakes me up. That wasn't coming from my head. There was the sound again. I quickly get up and run to the window, just in time to see some kind of light just off in the porch. It's really bizarre. Nothing should be around now, and we don't have any lights on where we're sleeping. Thinking maybe it's one of the other rangers, I quickly go over to the radio and wake up my buddy in the next one over. I say, "Did you see that?" My buddy's very confused, and from the tone of his voice I can tell that he's just woken up, and I say, "Give me 1 minute," and I go outside. As I go outside, I can't believe what I see. There's a very small, ancient looking music box just sitting on the porch, still playing its song, just like before. Now, confused out of my mind, and probably just being relatively delirious from waking up, I go off to investigate what the light is, which I know is very stupid. I look around and I can't seem to find anything. And then, I can see it again, just illuminating some of the trees, moving at a slow pace, and I follow after it. Now when I sprint after this thing, it doesn't pick up pace, it just seems to be at the exact same speed and distance to me. It's really hard to explain, but it's weird. I thought maybe it was some kind of hiker out of their mind that was playing tricks on me, but every time I seem to get closer to this thing, it just kind of vanishes through the trees, and what's really bizarre is the way it moves. It doesn't make sense how it kind of drifts through the trees. Now my common sense kicks in. The next thing I realise is that I have to turn around and immediately start sprinting in the opposite direction. After about a good 4.5 minutes of running, I make it back and my other ranger friend is there with a coffee. He says, "What were you doing?" I explain what happened and he looks at me very confused. I then point off in the distance and he goes very pale. I say what's wrong and he says, "Do you see that light?" I say, "Yeah, I just chased it." He said, "I've seen this before," and he quickly goes inside and tells me to follow. He slams the door behind and turns on all the lights in his cabin. He then tells me that he's seen this light before, and he says to me, "Did you hear the music?" At this point, the penny dropped and I feel very scared. I say, "Yeah, I did, that's why I investigated. I thought you put the music box out there." He then looks at me and says, "No, of course I didn't, I was asleep." And now the fear takes over. He then tells me that he's seen the exact same thing 2 or 3 times before over the last 6 months and he still has no idea what it was. We then realise that the music box should still be outside, and we quickly open the door and head out again to investigate. We look to the exact spot where it was before, and it's not there. I say, no, this can't be possible, it was literally right there on the porch. And my friend looks at me and says, "Don't worry." I start frantically looking around and I can't find it anywhere, and my friend can't either. We ended up staying up for another 2 hours just trying to find this box thing, but we can't find it. And there's no more music. We both looked off into the woods and we can't see any more light now. We decided that we should just stay in one person's cabin for safety reasons, and we start sharing ideas of what this thing could have been. I'd hate to admit it, but I kind of think it was some kind of alien, I tell my friend, and he's leaning more towards the fact it could be something more normal, but it doesn't make sense. There's no reason that it should have been so bright, or bright enough to have hurt my eyes, but why would it have been playing the music box? It doesn't really make sense. Neither of us can account for where that music box gone, and we decided it couldn't have possibly been anybody else because we're the only guys out here, and of course we would have seen or heard them, but how could anybody be this far out? How would they have possibly known their way around the tall trees, and how could they have moved so quickly without disturbing any of the ground? That's the weirdest part for me. I don't know whether somebody or a group of people followed me out there and they had some kind of really bright lantern or something, but it just doesn't make sense to me. The entire situation was just off, and that night is actually what made me change careers. Mind you, I couldn't do it as quick as I wanted. I still had about another 10 months left in the tank before I was able to actually leave, but I requested to leave that area and thankfully it was granted. I never did go back to those cabins, and I never really spoke to that friend much afterwards, so I don't know what else happened. One thing I do know is that there's something out there in those woods that shouldn't be there, and for as long as I live, I'm never gonna forget that song and that light that burnt my eyes. At about 8 PM last night, I was walking with a friend of mine, Sally, about a mile to the closest cafe. We're both girls in our late 20s, neither of us drive. Sally didn't have her Opal card, which is the Australian version of an Oyster card. So walking, that's our only option. It's summer over here, so it was fairly well lit, and we're both walking down the main roads and not too concerned. When we finally arrive at this cafe and sit down, now I was paying with my credit card, and sure enough, it was cash only. Sally was on the phone when I got back from the counter, so I just gestured her to stay put and guard while I went to get the cash out. This is my home suburb, so I know there's ATMs around, and my best bet is a gas station about a block away. Now I'm doing a light jog so I don't keep Sally waiting, when a balding sweaty guy, probably in his late 40s with a tank top and no shoes, comes facing behind me as I pass the corner of the block. He walked for about 100 meters. I really don't think much of it. The gas station was the next building along, and it seemed like he'd just come out of a nice suburban house along the street, and it's not the witching hour, so I just assume he's going to the gas station as I am. He didn't even cross my mind as I entered this tiny convenience store, nor did he follow me in. In my peripheral vision, I saw him walk past the door and out of sight. I look around for an ATM that they have inside sometimes. No luck. So I go up to this man in his late 30s, at the desk, reluctantly asking if they do a cash out. He smiles and says of course, saying who's with you. I have no idea who he's talking about at first, but he then points to the man from earlier, pacing around outside the store. Keep in mind, he didn't look at all menacing. He wasn't going back and forth just outside the door. He was just drifting in space outside, from the pavement to the gas pumps, to the storefront seemingly aimlessly. Maybe he's on drugs. I tell the clerk no, not thinking much of it, and he says, he was staring at you before, and I thought maybe he's your father. I laugh it off. I wasn't concerned at all. He was still ambling around outside. I couldn't imagine him having a fixed gaze on anything. I thank the clerk for the cash, but before I turn away he says, just wait and see if he leaves. We wait for a few minutes in silence, and the guy begins to pace back and forth directly against the front wall of the store, looking straight ahead, but never in. It still looked like the man was just a drug addict, and seemed harmless. Not once did I catch his gaze, so I figure it's safe to slip out, where it's starting to become dusk and kind of bright. Sally was texting me, where are you? I thank the guy at the desk again for his concern, assure him that I don't know the guy and am not involved in some weird scheme to rob the store. The clerk asks if I want him to walk out with me. I say that it should be alright, and begin walking away from the block. As I leave the store though, the drifting man stops pacing and makes a beeline for me from the other end of the building. I seriously don't think much of the guy at all up until this point, but now he's powering towards me. The hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I start to power walk so he doesn't think I'm actively trying to escape him, still trying to convince myself that I'm being paranoid and should be more casual. I don't look behind me to see how close he is. I've reached the pavement on the other side of the gas pumps when I hear the clerk outside. He's yelling at me, run! I make a break for it, looking over my shoulder. He grabbed the man from behind. The balding man isn't even glancing behind him or trying to escape. He's literally just staring at me, running away with this death stare. I kept running until I crossed the road and then turned around, but still standing. The clerk is holding on to the man. The clerk and I are just looking at each other in pure bewilderment, not really knowing what to do. He makes a hand gesture to go and I wave thanks. I go back to Sally and we rush home a complete different way. It's a really weird experience. I'm just thankful that the gas station worker was so kind and caring. When I was younger, I worked at a gas station as an attendant. I was really hoping to do a good job to impress my supervisors, but I had a few things go wrong what made him lose faith in me. One of the scariest moments was a crazy local drove down by the station, hid in the bushes, and literally started shooting the pumps. My boss is convinced he's aiming for me, but it seemed like I was an unintended target, that he was actually trying to shoot the supplies. Paint cans and oil cans suffer the most damage. I can't figure out why on earth he was trying to do this. He is a real nutcase. I was lucky that the whole thing didn't blow up that day. Freaking crazy. This happened about 6 months ago, and it's really been bugging me since. This will be long, but I must set the scene. So my family has a cabin we've had since the 60s, and I've been going there my entire life throughout the years. It's nestled in a little town of less than 2,000, surrounded in vast forest and farmland. You see cows everywhere and stray dogs that let you stroke them. You'll maybe see 30 people in a day if you go into the little town and shops around. Definition of a small country town for sure. Since I spent my entire life there, I know pretty much everyone. All my family knows everyone. Men dressed in western clothes with big jeans and old flannel shirts and belts with big buckles. Women dressed in jeans and tank tops with country factory logos on them. They're all nice enough and keep to themselves. So I'm driving up there one night to meet my parents since they had been gone the night previously to open the cabin for spring. My boyfriend has also flown in so he can finally meet my family up there. I'd been driving until it got dark. About a 2-hour and 10-minute drive from my house, and he had been taken over driving from around 10. There's a little national park close by, about 15 miles of total land. Since I'd fallen asleep and couldn't give directions, he decided to log the address into the GPS. It took him through the back way through the park that I never drive through. So when he woke me up to ask me where the next turn is since the GPS said he couldn't go either way, it took me a minute to figure out where the hell are we. There were no lights anywhere, and we're the only car for about 15 miles. There's long forest with tall giant trees on either side of the road, with a lonely deer or two in the woods to keep us company. I mentioned switching drivers because I remembered that road, which would lead directly into the intersection that would go through a small community up to the mountain by my cabin. But it was prime. Leave a tow baby on the side of the road and kidnap someone when they check it out territory. It was dark enough that the forest was thick enough that we joked some cult members are probably there. Hell, maybe they are. Needless to say, we decided stopping isn't a good idea. We eventually passed through a small clearing/intersection with a dinky concrete building on the side of the road with one light on, and a car pulled in the slanted gravel ground. My boyfriend drives forward. He then sees that there's 2 people there. My gut immediately twisted, and I start to feel sick. Sick enough to feel ice cold sweat running through my hair, and my veins now are pumping through to my stomach. You never see people at night here, and it's 2 teen boys in fact. wearing nice clothes, Nike shorts and obnoxiously coloured sport workout clothing, aka very out of place, like something's wrong. They see us coming and walk away from what appears to be an old beat up car, probably from the 1960s, and it's important to note that this was completely gone of any paint and rusting. They smile at us and wave. I don't have a clue who these people are, and I'm starting to hear noises around us. I knew a gas station was right up the road from us. They could have just walked from there, but there's no lights up the road and no reason to be here. The building around us is abandoned, but there's a light on the wall. I'm starting to think these are in on it. They walk out onto the road, almost blocking my boyfriend from going forward, who had to slow down continuously not to hit them. Suddenly the light goes out in the building. They constantly wave their arms and smile at us, saying something that we can't hear. We think about stopping but decide it's stupid to. My boyfriend quickly drove around them, slamming on the gas, trying to calm me down since the whole scene scares the life out of me. Images of getting out of the car and something stranger or worse happening flew through my head. I look behind us and they're suddenly angry, staring at us, not moving an inch, and the light flickers on in the background in the building. Who are those kids? Why were they wearing city clothes? They looked too young to be driving. I know it wasn't their car. And who was in the building? We finally made it out and found the intersection we wanted that led to the familiar gas station, and he didn't hesitate when I said I need to drive next. About 10 or so minutes later, we get to the cabin and explain what happened, and my parents are terrified. God knows what would have happened if we had stopped and actually got out. I don't like to think of it. A little over a year ago, I worked at a gas station. It was one of those 24/7 ones with a mini mart inside of it, and I worked the evening shift. Now, I saw and dealt with a lot of messed up things in that store, which just led me to roll my eyes when people were doing or saying creepy stuff. Hell, if I had $1 for every time I was threatened with death, I'd be retired now. So one night, I was out in the store restocking shelves when one of the regulars came in and started talking to me. He was a full-blown druggie. He would have been in his 50s, and he was tweaking while sitting on me. By this point, I'm used to weird stuff and ignore it. He said some messed up things to me though, something about what he wanted to do with me. I zoned in and out of what he was saying. It wasn't uncommon for him to ramble about weird acts and other gross things. I tell him that I have to get back behind the counter because my co-worker needs me to make coffee for a customer. He was a bit irritated but said that he would talk to me later and left the shop. After making coffee, I had to restock drinks, but the day team hadn't emptied the trolleys of boxes, so I took out the boxes to the big bin. The bin is located on another side of the store, but there's no cameras, so people inside the store can't see you there. That used to make me nervous, but I had been there longer than some of the people who had come through and was used to the environment. As I was throwing the boxes in the bin, the tweaking guy from before comes up to me, grabs my arm. I tried to play it off like he's goofing around and laugh and say something like, "Hey, I know you like me, but you can't do that. My husband's gonna get mad." Sounds like I wasn't trying much, but With people like him, it was best to remain friendly. The last time someone was more firm, he got knocked out by a right hook, and I was a lucky girl who got to witness it and call the police. He then gets angry and says, "I told you I was gonna have my way with you." Now, I've stopped smiling and I'm scared. He shoves me against a bin and goes to unbuckle his belt when glass smashed. One of my favourite customers was across the road at a pub and saw him go straight for me, knowing his reputation, knowing something bad was happening. And when he saw what was going on, he smashes a bottle over his head. Cops were called and I don't see him again. As for the guy who saved me, I given him free coffee for a month. I refused outright to take out the boxes now. I'm just glad I got off okay and was saved that day. Probably the weirdest thing that happened to me in my life was when I was driving to a gas station one night. Now, I was on a very long road trip at the time, heading from college to home. I literally had to drive hundreds of miles, and I'm in the middle of the backwoods, not seeing cars or buildings for miles. I'm starting to get worried because of how low my gas is running. I'm really thinking that I'm gonna have to tent it out here in the middle of the night or something, the last thing that I want to be doing. And hey, did I forget to mention that I'm terrified of the woods? Just as I'm thinking this, I decide to switch on the radio to try and calm my nerves. Even worse, they're playing ABBA songs. I really don't like ABBA songs, and I continue going. Luckily for me though, I've got the moonlight to help guide me, even though that my headlights aren't doing much to penetrate the woods. We now entering the dangerously low gas territory, and I'm worried, but lo and behold, what do I see? An old gas station up ahead. Oh, thank God, I think to myself. I was getting worried there. I pull into the gas station and stop for a second before getting out. I have a really weird feeling. I know it's quiet where I'm driving, but it's just far too quiet up here. I look around and don't see anyone. There's no one near the counter either, and it looks abandoned almost. I then hear a voice on the intercom. "Yeah, just go pump your gas, we'll help you in a minute," in a horrible raspy old voice. Now, the very second that I go to unlock my door, all of the lights shut off. I know it's not a power outage either, but I can still hear the sounds of the intercom not being turned off fully. Needless to say, I turn my engine key. I'm shaking so much I can't even put it into gear. Not to worry, adrenaline takes over, and I speed up to 60 like I've never drove so quick in my life, and don't bother looking back. As I've been driving for about half a minute, I can see lights in the distance behind me. I'm scared to look. Turns out, all of the lights are on again in the gas station. I have no idea what happened that day, or what they were planning to do with me. Things I do know for a fact though is that they purposely turned off the lights and were purposely waiting for someone to come there. And I also know that there was no help or way to find me if anything happened out there.